and put a text out to Anton Winthorne to see if he can join us soon. But I will take a few minutes since we have a few minutes. I want to preface the remarks from from at least Dr. Gonzalez. I shared this morning that I was able to go to college because of a tribal grant and then because of the National Institutes of Mental Health grant that got me to Portland State, actually. And the reason I came to Portland State was the program that was federally funded, and the director, his name was John Spence. And John is still in the area, still teaching, and he recruited me heavily to come to Oregon, where other universities would hem and haw about, well, we don't know whether we're going to have enough money for you, or John would call and say, I've got money for you, how's your family, what else do you need, you know, and I thought, well, I'm going to Oregon. It was that personal connection. As a matter of fact, the other universities said, you know, we'll tell you whether we have money for you in August, some date. And John said, well, you tell me whether you're coming here by July 10th. So I called him the morning of July 10th, and my wife was in labor. So I called John, and he started, I said, I'm coming, and he started asking me a question. I said, John, I really can't talk to you right now because I have to take my wife to the hospital. She's in labor. And he said, my God, man, get off the phone. So off we went to the hospital, and so you can imagine a young family picking up to move all the way across the country. It took a lot to make that possible. Now, I didn't understand at the time or appreciate until much later what a unique opportunity I had. The program that was federally funded, John Spence and others had put together a collaboration between Portland Community College, where there was a feeder group of Native people studying social work at the AA school. The undergraduate social work program at the time of Portland State was also funding Native students, and so there were 14 graduate students, 7 first year, 7 second year, about another 15 from the undergraduate program, and another 15 from Portland Community College, and we all had classes together. First time in my life, I walked into a classroom of 40 Indian students, and who was in town at that time? Dennis Banks was in Portland fighting expedition. Vernon Belcourt was passing through. So all of these AIM leaders were in town. Medicine men from the Plains area, the fishing leaders from here in the Northwest, and we would have guest lecturers on a regular basis and begin to discuss in depth what were what we're now saying the indigenous issues of the time, and to begin to talk about what it meant to be in higher education and to be in the midst of this political environment. And I can tell you one of the most important days, moments of my life was in the basement of the Portland State Library. At that time, there were no books to read about the indigenous experience. We had a few articles, and so the articles were on reserve at the library, and so you had to go into the reserve library and read. So I was sitting in the Portland State Library reading articles like Native American lifeways and their implications for social work, Evelyn Blanchard, and On Being Non-Indian by Wax and Thomas, and a whole just books by social work people who had begun to write As I was sitting there that day, I looked at the words and I had this incredible aha moment of, I'm not stupid, I'm Indian. I'm not sullen, I'm Indian. I'm not quiet, I'm Indian. I'm not any of those labels they put on me at school. I didn't learn to read until I was in the 4th grade because in my school it was considered that Indian kids don't learn. So I was put in the slow reading group, the slow math group. It wasn't, so I didn't even, because of that, I didn't read a book for pleasure until I was 27 years old. I read because I had to. I learned survival reading to get through school. In other words, you read the table of contents, the index, all the italicized words in the first and last sentence of every paragraph, and you can digest the book in about 4 hours. And this, as I sat there that day and realized that the mannerisms, the communication patterns that I learned in my family were completely at odds. That's why I was a fish out of water in every learning setting that I was in until I got to Portland State and sat in a classroom with 40 Indians. And for the first time in my life, my hand was up and I was asking questions and I was engaging. I was searching new ideas. I was exploring. I was learning about myself. I had to have exploration of my own identity. And boy, by the time I got done, I wanted it all and I wanted it yesterday. So I went out home to out Seneca the Senecas. And as I said, I had this amazing and brutal experience as I encountered a very, very difficult world. You see, when I moved back to my reservation, every program in our tribe was run by a non-native person. The last thing they wanted to see was an educated Seneca come back. And it only took about a month before the character assassination started. I went to my first parent advisory committee meeting. It was an Indian education program governed by a parent committee. The director of the program I worked for asked me for a brief report. He said, just write some things out on a yellow pad and give it to me, and I'll mark it up and give it back to you. Right? I did what he asked. We got closer to the meeting, and I asked, did you have my draft? He said, oh, I've taken care of it. It's okay. So, well, we show up at the meeting, comes time for my report. He pulls out my yellow pad all marked up in red ink, throws it out on the table and said, I just want you to see the quality of the person you hired. And I thought, oh crap, game on. And that was the least of what happened to me in that first experience. I nearly lost my life in that experience. Because I confronted things that people didn't want to have confronted. I had to move my family off the reservation. I had finally to move away because it was not safe for me to drive my car from one place to the next. So I came out of that experience vowing that should never happen to a young Indian professional coming out of school and trying to practice. If I ever had a chance to do something about that, I was going to do that. That's why I founded the National Indian Child Welfare Association. The thing that I almost lost my life over was trying to protect a young woman who was being abused, and nobody wanted that brought out into public. And I couldn't do anything but help buy her a bus ticket to go be with a relative so she could escape the situation she was in, because I couldn't get the sheriff's department to come on the reservation. I couldn't get a call back from the FBI and the tribal police. Were not even safe for me to call. I vowed no kid should ever have to face that by themselves. And for me to take the risk with a few other people to get her on a bus so she could escape that situation with a system that would do nothing. There was no child welfare laws or programs or courts or anything to deal with that. So again, that's what drove me to this, establishing the National Indian Child Welfare Association. And what makes me passionate about having access for Native people to higher education and the uniqueness of having a space to become better Indigenous people. Not just to learn what social work means to the mainstream, or what anything means to the mainstream, but to legitimize the thought of my ancestors, my family, my community. I come to understand that colonialism requires 5 conditions for any colonial power to control the indigenous population. First of all, they have to take the land. They have to control the territory. Second of all, they have to take control of the natural resources, particularly food and water, because if you can control food and water, you can control the population. Thirdly, they have to delegitimize the governance structure and replace the governance structure with the structure of the colonial power. Delegitimize governance. Fourth, they have to take away the legitimacy of thought, to declare that the thought of the indigenous population is primitive, that it's less than language, culture, healing practices, educational practices. To delegitimize that, I've since learned that in the writings of the folks who wrote the first dictionary, Webster, the folks who founded Dartmouth, the folks who founded Harvard, Thomas Jefferson's writings about how to deal with the native population all talk about how important it was for the survival of the colonies to delegitimize the native thought. Because our political system, particularly amongst the Haudenosaunee, was very sophisticated. Our economy was based on abundance, not on scarcity, and that had never been seen in Europe. Women had rights politically. They were afraid that the women would want the same rights that the native women had. And this is, anyone can read these correspondence. Now, the last item, in order to complete this process of controlling the indigenous population, is you have to take their children. Because it so devastates a colonial population or the indigenous population that it's hard to recover. It tears at the fabric of the social structure. And that process has been replicated everywhere in the world that colonialism, not just European colonialism, but other forms of colonialism as well. My sense is that my education at Portland State, because it flew under the radar, and because of people like John Spence, I learned to re-legitimize indigenous thought, my own, and to reclaim, to remember. Now, Theda Newbris from Blackfeet says that colonialism dismembered our culture, dismembered our families. Our job is remembering, putting ourselves back. So, as indigenous people remember, we have a lot to offer. what we're looking for, and this is the world according to Terry Cross. What we're looking for is space in the higher education system for indigenous thought to thrive, to have places to gather, to explore, to legitimize that thought. And we're just, I'd say we have beachheads that they help establish those beachheads with firm footing. But I invited Dr. Kelly Gonzalez because she is in a position, she is developing an Indigenous Studies program in public health at Portland State and jointly with Oregon Health Sciences University. Basically making space in those institutions for Indigenous thought about public health, to serve tribal communities, but also to legitimize a way of understanding human health and human well-being in that academic space. And I intended to introduce this in just about 5 minutes, but I've taken a lot of time to set the context because I think that our discussion is so important, and I want to relate this panel and my words to our diversity, equity, and inclusion agenda. That inclusion means more than opening the doors. Inclusion means you make space for people's thinking, for the legitimacy of learning that fits. And I know in my heart that with that kind of inclusion, that Native people from all over the country will want to come to Oregon to go to school. And the funding is great, but if you have an opportunity to remember, to heal from that process that dismembered and delegitimized a way of thinking that I think has the promise of helping our society sustain into the future. This is what I'm hoping for. This is what we put together this panel. Rudy Ann did a terrific job. And so I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Kelly Gonzalez to tell us about the work that she's doing and yield the floor to Kelly.
Thank you. I am not sure how to turn my camera on. Can anyone, am I able to do that?
Not yet, we can hear you.
Okay.
Is there an X through your camera icon at the very top?
No, for some reason.
Do you have a camera icon? So it's next to the mic.
I do. Yes, I do. Next to the microphone, but it's not activating.
Does she have her camera covered?
No, but it's quite all right. But you do have my PowerPoint, is that correct? And you can show that.
Yes.
Okay. Well, hi everyone. Apologies for the technical difficulties. You can hear me fine?
Yeah.
Okay, so thank you all. Thank you, commissioners and Chair Cross, for inviting me today to this space, the space that you're creating to uplift Native students and share ideas to build forward education pathways that benefit Indigenous communities, generations, and all lives. My name is Kelly Gonzalez. I'm an enrolled citizen of the Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma. I'm a descendant of Nancy Ward and Six Finger of Oklahoma. And Six Finger of the Deer and Wolf Clan. My family arrived to Portland, Oregon through the Federal Relocation Assimilation Initiative. My grandparents are both boarding school survivors. I descend from ancestors that survived brutal projects of colonialism, including removal and the Trail of Tears. I am a descendant of miracle survivors of genocide because my ancestors, they made the decision to live even though the conditions were not supportive of life. They were inspired by the hope of me and my children, and today I do my best to center my life in the dreams inspired into me by my ancestors who loved me even before they knew me. So in honor of their vibrance and love and their choice to keep their eyes and their minds on the beautiful things, I too have chosen education as a path to better serve my community in integrity and dignity, and to advance forward thriving Indigenous futures for my children and my children's children. The vision is big. I've been working with fortitude to extend this path despite the challenges of being the first in my nuclear family to attend and graduate from university, to occupy space as the first and only Native in a tenure track position with the OHSU-PSU School of Public Health, and the first and only Native to ever earn tenure and promotion in that program. When I graduated with my PhD in public health, I was the only Native in the nation to earn a degree in public health with a PhD that year. I've completed, as Terry was mentioning, you know, the real support I ever felt in education was after, in my postdoc, where I completed 2 years of training at the Centers for American Indian Alaska Native Health at University of Colorado, which was intended and designed for Native researchers and scholars to be successful. And we had intergenerational mentorship, and we were able to ground in our cultural identities and our Indigenous values first, and then learn to weave Western knowledge in Western ways. But our indigeneity was not contingent on the approval of Western knowledge and Western systems. That was the first experience I had in my education experience, pathway, where it felt life affirming. So my path for Indigenous equity extends beyond the higher education space. I try to thread my work across systems and other universities in public health. I serve on the Governor's COVID Vaccination Advisory Board, the Racial Justice Council's Health Equity Committee. I'm the co-founder of the BIPOC Decolonizing Data Council, founder of Indigenous Health Equity Institute, current PSU Presidential Fellow, and I'm claimed by the Seven Waters Canoe family, the Native Wellness Institute, and the Portland Urban Native Community. And in addition to all of those accomplishments or spaces that I occupy, I am a mother. I'm mother to Ren, Jubilee, and Caleb Starr, who Ren was just accepted into university, a songwriting program in Nashville, Tennessee. And I'm so happy to celebrate that joy with her. And I know that you know, that's evidence of me breaking a cycle in my family. So now my daughter is going to college. So with these experiences and perspectives, I'm honored to be here at this really historic gathering to talk about American Indian Alaska Native experiences in higher education and to move the conversation to solutions. Today, I'll briefly share some of the challenges and some solutions by centering in the field of public health, which is where my work situates. And I ask for you to be in this space with me with an open heart and open mind, good attention and patience. And, you know, I might use words that are unsettling or cause discomfort. And I'm learning how to speak to you, to dominant systems in the spirit of self-preservation, truth, and moving forward. I appreciate this opportunity, and I recognize it's not always easy for all of us involved, but I believe in truth as the pathway to equity, and I believe in the dignity and integrity and self-determination of my community, as well as myself as a whole, vibrant, thriving Indigenous woman. So if you could move to the next slide, please. Oh, I should go back and just tell you on that first slide, if you can go back to the first slide real quick. As part of the Seven Waters Canoe family, we practice the canoe values, canoe culture. And during COVID, one of the things that we did, or right before COVID, was we all made hand drums. And we went through the entire process and involved our youth, where we were tanning hides and making the drums, the hand drums. And now we're learning songs and, you know, building a strong community of vibrance and beauty to pass along intergenerationally the best parts of ourselves as Indian people. So you can go to slide 2 now. Thank you. So when I think of higher education within a Western paradigm and teaching pathways, certainly my experiences of teaching and my own experiences of education, I think of it as a system of Indigenous genocide and production of inequities. It's difficult. I think about, you know, like the challenges that the salmon has to fulfill its role to benefit all of us humans by sacrificing its life for us, and then the relationality of water to support salmon and help salmon get to where it needs to go so it can fulfill its full purpose. I think of myself as a student, as an educator. I think about all of our young upcoming our youth who are on their journey in education to become leaders. And I often think about how do we get through these programs with all of the challenges of these programs, of this system? How do we get through it intact? How do we get through it as our whole selves? And how do we do it without compromising our identity as Native people? Some of the barriers that I've acknowledged in my research and also in my teaching, you can see here on this slide. So institutional racism, white supremacy, settler colonial logics, power hoarding, gatekeeping, viewing Native people as to be saved versus understanding we have something to contribute, and a lack of process and a lack of commitment to heal these roots, these oppressive roots. Often we find folks who are not well, who aren't on a healing path to replace these systems, to freeze and get overwhelmed and then feel like there's no way to move forward. And so then we go back and we just keep recreating and perpetuating a system that really doesn't benefit Native people and is harmful and can then be harmful to all of us. Some of my own is the short-sightedness and the tenure and promotion practice, which I'll talk about in a minute. A lack of strengths-based resources for our students, a lack of Indigenous perspective and scholarship within the curriculum. Certainly within the field of public health, there's a lack of understanding what health and wellness and healing means from the perspective of Indigenous people. What I was taught was that as Indigenous people, we are in relationality with all things seen and unseen. We think in a good way. So when we're thinking in a good way, that means that we act in a good way, that we have protocols and songs and relationship with plants that thrive and sustain life and Mother Earth. It's very powerful. There's an ignorance in Indigenous knowledge, maybe even a fear around bringing in, creating space, supporting space for Indigenous knowledge. And then a perpetuation of status quo and the delusion that status quo is going to bring us to justice. And I would contend that it may bring us to justice, but more likely white justice. So some of the solutions I've just bullet pointed here, and I'll just read them without going into detail, but revised curriculum and resource offerings, intergenerational cultural and strengths-based mentoring and learning, unsettling white supremacy, healing the lasting impacts of colonialism that we are all impacted by, understand and replace systemic racialized oppression and settler colonialism and white justice. So replace systems of Indigenous erasure is ultimately what this is calling for. Okay, next slide, please. I'm sorry. My own experiences advancing in this higher education has been challenging. I would say the challenges have really undermined my ability to be creative and to serve my students in the best way possible and serve my research and my community then in the best way possible. In 2018, I was able to offer some suggestions and guidance to the founding dean of the School of Public Health. There really at that time was no initiative for anti-racism, no consideration for anti-racism within a perspective and centering on BIPOC people. Those initiatives were really centered on a white dominant framework of knowledge. And I was inspired to write a letter, even though I didn't have tenure yet. And I was afraid that there would be an X on my back and I would be not promoted. And in this letter, I co-wrote it with community members from the Native community. I had guidance to make sure that my tone was well balanced. And the message I wanted to convey was that holding a community gathering of students, community, public health professionals, leaders, to hold a community gathering called the Public Health Portland Style Learning Series on the topic of racism at a bar was not trauma-informed or culturally respectful or historically rooted and aware. They didn't understand that alcohol has been used as a chemical oppressive weapon to destroy and subdue Native men and our cultural ways. They didn't understand that having students speak in front of people where alcohol was being consumed may cause people to feel safe in a way that really wasn't trauma-informed and safe. That it was a big thing for me to write this letter, and it was received well. The gathering still happened, but the adjustment was that alcohol was to be consumed outside of the space in another room of the bar. That was difficult. This past summer, through the BIPOC Decolonizing Data Council, I helped to facilitate an open letter to Oregon OHSU and the School of Public Health that their statewide study on COVID was using racist methodologies. They invited us in to help provide guidance on how to dismantle those methodologies. We were doing a lot of teaching, but in the end, the project, the leadership decided to end the project because they recognized they stepped out on the wrong foot and hadn't already had a relationship with the BIPOC community. So that was challenging. And then, of course, my tenure review, I was initially voted to be terminated and not offered tenure and promotion. Despite my great research track record, funding, I'm a hard worker. I offer so much to students and community. I think the issue there was they opened up my dossier and they just didn't quite understand the orientation to my work, the way I do my work, the decolonized approach to my work, the trauma-informed approach to my work, the centering on the strengths of my community and my Indigenous values. So I wrote a 28-page single-spaced response to defend myself on December 27th, a couple of days after Christmas. And they did finally make the decision to offer me tenure and promotion. So I offer this to you not as, not to pity me, not to get stuck in the drama of the trauma, but one of the areas of this transformational change within our institutions that has to be addressed is the ignorance to Indigenous people, ignorance to what we have to contribute, and ignorance to the necessity for us to be contributors in higher education and knowledge production. And when the system is not ready to embrace people like me, my energy is put into defending myself, and it draws the best of me away from my students. It draws the best of me away from my research. It draws the best of me away from my community, from my children, and from my own life. But I persevere. So next slide, please. Thanks. So I persevere because I love my children and I love the hope and promise of their children and their children's children, just as my ancestors had done for me. I believe that in order to get to equity, we have to have pathways of truth and move beyond pathways of just inclusion. But creating spaces, as you were all talking about and included in your roadmap, your strategic roadmap, for other ways of learning and knowing. but also, you know, recognizing without contingency, recognizing from the beginning that as Native people, we are strong. Integrating Indigenous knowledge is a foundational approach for learning and research. It's the way we can embrace alternative traditions of learning and knowing while fostering awesome research and scholarship and future leaders. Within the field of public health, you know, it still remains a discipline largely rooted in Western knowledge systems, fueled by colonial logics, white supremacy, patriarchy, and all of that undermine the value and validity of Indigenous people and knowledges. The normalization of Western knowledge undermines professors' abilities to engage in culturally sustaining, revitalizing pedagogies, which seek to be culturally responsive to Indigenous students, as well as reclaim and revitalize knowledges that have been disrupted and displaced by colonization. This normalization of Western knowledge also makes equity for Indigenous people inconceivable, particularly within the context of public health, because of the very roots of public health, because of the oppressive roots of public health are not revealed, and therefore they can't be healed or replaced. So for example, public health originated in the War Department. Public health initiatives sought assimilation practices to kill the Indian and save the man, reduce natives as less than human, as being soulless, less valuable, needing to be saved. These sentiments continue to this day as evidenced in curriculum that positions natives as an afterthought, as historized, as not included in promoting the idea within a workforce that natives have nothing to contribute to the greater good. So these are difficulties, these are challenges. You know, when I think about the pathway with the dams, I think, okay, do we build on top of those dams? Do we build bridges? Do we create new pathways that go around those dams? Do we take those dams down? You know, I don't know the answers. I think we should take those dams down, but I don't have the power for that. I'm quite far from power to be able to do that. But one of the solutions for me, if we could go to the next slide, please, is I believe in building a public health workforce with expertise on Indigenous health issues, rooted in Indigenous values. Teachings are offered by Indigenous people using an intergenerational modality and extending beyond the four classroom walls and getting our students into the water and on the land. Next slide, please. So in collaboration with Indigenous scholars, communities, and leaders, I've created a new academic pathway at the undergraduate level to support American Indian Alaska Native students, as well as non-Native students, that really does center on the strengths of Native people. This helps to intervene and eliminate some of the institutional barriers that they face and promotes a model of institutional change to diversify public health that is connected also to the STEM field and health professional fields at the undergraduate level. And the programming is culturally sustaining and responsive to Indigenous people. This undergraduate concentration is the first of its kind in the nation. There are a couple of Indigenous health programs at the graduate level in public health, and there's one PhD program in the nation. So I imagine that this undergraduate concentration would feed into those other programs. And also, because I'm creating an advisory board of stakeholders who are within the university and also public health institutions and community, I'm trying to create a workforce that is ready to take on a decolonizing approach and infiltrate it into the public health systems to help promote healing from the lasting impacts of colonization, to put their arms out and make space for Indigenous values and knowledge within the context of public health, and that the workforce is doing it together with Native students and non-Native students in solidarity. To me, this is the pathway for justice that is life-affirming and benefits all lives. This program is, I developed it 5 years ago. It took about a year for it to get all the approvals within the university. And, it's been slow going. It will have a soft launch in the fall. There is a new position, a director position that I was able to advocate for to help protect and grow the program. But the resources for this program are are scant. And, my ability to bring in partners is vital to this new academic pathway for our students. It's exciting though, and I'm really trying not to look in the past and stay stuck on some of the injustices that I experienced, but I am holding those as guides so that this concentration can be embraced and good love poured into it like it deserves, and sustained through the loving care of community and decolonized allies who believe in replacing systems of erasure and who believe in moving beyond the words to put action into place for thriving Indigenous futures, to end Indigenous erasure and genocide. So it's a worthy and ambitious vision. Yeah, and if you could move to the next slide, please. So this is who is going to be going to the program, right? These are our children. I'd asked the president of OHSU at one point a couple of years ago, he was talking about enlightenment for his strategic plan, and I kept saying, but if you're not talking about settler colonialism and the truth of the lasting impacts of colonization, interrogating it, unsettling it, and replacing it, then how are our Native students going to thrive? Our Native youth are healing because I'm healing, or the adults are healing, the mothers, the fathers, the grandfather, the community is healing. And we are pouring so much love into our kids. And so, like my daughter who's in this picture, and all of my other, I'm auntie to these kids, they come to the university as their whole selves, believing in themselves as strong, vibrant, powerful Indigenous people with something to contribute to their community and to the world. And if a system doesn't also recognize that and embrace them in that good, loving way, then we're in trouble. Then we're in trouble. So I really appreciate the HECC for acknowledging our college is ready for students and putting that question out there. It inspired me, which is why I included it. It inspired me because this is the question I've asked leaders and have yet to really get a good answer or commitment from. So I appreciate you all for committing to using your power and privilege and decision-making status to improve the lives of Native youth so that they can become the leaders that they desire to be and that we know that they can be. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Kelly. I appreciate your being with us today and sharing your story. Any questions or comments from the commission?
You can ask me anything.
Okay.
No question for me. I just would like to say thank you to our guest for being so open and demonstrating what a new form of leadership might be like. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. I appreciate those words.
Any other questions? Commissioner Edwards.
Hi, sorry, I'm juggling cameras. Thank you for that presentation. My question is, if you could, someone like me, with one question that would be the most helpful to be able to take forward into different forums, to stay open and curious and to be in that drive for inclusivity, what would be the question that you think we should be asking?
Sure. Well, you're welcome to show my slide with the river and the dams for perspective, for people to really understand. You know, I always ask, is your justice replacing systems of Indigenous genocide? Mostly people don't understand what that means, though. But what is the commitment to thriving lives of Indigenous people? I don't know, like when giving land acknowledgement, I often ask people to use that as an opportunity to think about, well, where are the Native people? Where are the descendants of those that sacrificed so much? You know, where our universities, the land that our universities occupy is stolen land of Indigenous people. And where are the Indigenous people? That's one question to ask. What is our commitment to ensuring more Indigenous people are here? What are we missing out on as a collective when Indigenous people and knowledge is not here? And so I guess part of it is I'm encouraging you to come up with your own answers to some of those questions so that you can further advocate for Native people. There's so few of us in these spaces. We rely on our colleagues and advocates to help uplift, you know, our needs. But there is like a need to understand the lasting impacts of colonization and to be able to talk about that. And what impact does that make on not just Native people, but all people? Like, what is the benefit for doing that good healing work? Why do we need that? I can tell you, I've shared some of that today, but as advocates of Native communities and Native futures, you know, white folks have to be able to answer those questions and talk to other white folks about that it, does that make sense? Is that helpful?
Yeah. Yeah, that is helpful, especially that last one that you said. It feels very open. So, thank you.
Kelly, I would add to that. I often use the phrase rejecting the colonial lie. Just think about how well American society is taught and trained to believe that Indigenous people are no longer here, or that we were a noble race that perished, or that there's not enough of us to count. There's a whole range of things that there's some recent data that says that the average American is exposed to 5 negative stereotypes of Native Americans every day, and we don't see it around us because it's so prevalent. And this process of reclaiming legitimacy of thought, legitimacy of being, is the process I want to now refer to as, I think, decolonization. You hear that term a lot. And there's and it's happening in all fields. And as my mother passed away a few years ago at 93. She seldom spoke of any of these issues because she was beaten for speaking her language when she was 5 years old. She didn't teach us that language because of that. I would travel around the country talking about these issues because I was a pretty angry advocate when I was young. And when I'd go home to talk to my mother, she didn't ask me, or she'd tell me, I'd tell her about the work that I was doing. Do you suppose that she said, great, congratulations? No, she never said that. What she said was, you be careful out there. People don't want to hear what you have to say. And I tell people that my mother's generation was the generation of fear because it was not safe to be Native when she was growing up. My generation was the generation of anger. We said no more, put the stake in the ground, and AIM and other movements, the angry reactions. Today, I have the experience of working with young people all over the country, Indigenous people who are unencumbered by either the fear or the anger, and they are making it possible for us to reclaim who we are. So my hat's off to the next generations who are writing in the literature, who are getting the degrees, who are making space, and Kelly is one of those people. So thank you, Kelly, for being with us.
Yeah, thank you, Kelly. This is Frank Goulart. I had a question for you and perhaps Chairman Commissioner Cross. When Commissioner Cross spoke of his background when he got to college and he was thrown in with 40 Indians, and he raised his hand and he was able to speak freely, and it opened up his whole life. Is that the case now, particularly with the tribal grant? Or is it up to institutions to integrate those of all various folks, or is it all going to be segregated like Chair Cross faced in his day?
Well, I can address that first. I think there has to be space for both. There has to be the space to have the freedom to explore our thought with each other, and there has to be a place for dialogue and to learn how to cross those bridges, because it's not that we don't want to learn the mainstream ways of doing things. It's very valuable. One of my most important teachings from one of my elders, my dad was white, my mom was Seneca. I had a white man's education, and I learned a lot of our traditions, and I had a huge identity crisis in my young adult years. But one of my elders said to me as we were sitting talking one day, he said, what makes a bridge strong? And I said, I don't know, concrete, rebar, whatever. He said, no, a bridge is only strong if it's got a good foundation on both sides. He said, your white man's education, your dad's teachings, That's your foundation in the white world. He said, your mother's teachings, our culture, our spiritual ways, that's your foundation in our world. He said, you're going to be a bridge. And a bridge is only strong as if it has a strong foundation on both sides. That's some of the best therapy I ever had, because it grounded me in being okay with bringing both of those things to bear. So I set out to get all the letters behind my name I could get, to really educate myself in as many fields as I could, and deeply as I could understand our indigenous ways, because I want to be able to have that dialogue. Vine Deloria, one of our primary scholars, said our native way of understanding the world is like a circle, and the mainstream world is like a line. But every line comes from the middle of our circle, and it's the place where the line crosses the circle is the space for dialogue between the mainstream, between the Western mind and the indigenous mind. And that's the place where we have to meet in academia. So I think the answer to your question is both and. Kelly, any addition to that?
Sure. Let's see. So I have very few opportunity to, let's see. My Native health class, I have the opportunity to be with more Native students, and it's great. My other classes, like say I teach a undergraduate course of 125 students, an introduction to public health. It's a diverse group. I teach from an Indigenous perspective. I let the students know that this could be their only opportunity that they'll have in their entire education career to be taught from a Native person. I center on Native health equity issues because as Native people, we experience some of the most striking and persistent health disparities. I was told by my department to not teach from an Indigenous perspective in that course. I'm not quite sure what that means. So I had to navigate around that or just ignore it. So that's challenging, right? And that's a lot for me to sort of sort out. The students in public health, again, like the orientation, the learning is rooted in a Western knowledge base and a colonial logics, which situates Native people always less than or to be pitied, and within the context of public health, the way that comes out is, let's create programs to save the Indians. You know, there's no power sharing. There's not a conversation of building power and capacity within our communities to tap into our already, into our knowledge base of health and wellness. So how do we weave these knowledge bases together? How do we do that? There's benefit from both. How do we do that? I want my kids, unlike my experience, to go to college knowing that they can show up first as Natives, and I want them to feel proud of that. I hope, I know this will not come true for them. I know that they will be in classes where they're often the only Native, and they'll serve as the spokesperson for all Native people. You know, that's a lot. They are not, and they experience this now in high school, and I tell them it is not, they don't have the degrees behind their name to teach in that way. They're not getting paid to take the place of teacher, you know, to address the gaps in the knowledge of that teacher. It's not appropriate. It's not appropriate. And that's one example that we can tell a system is not designed for our best selves. Yeah.
And then turn left.
Can you
Well,
still hear me? Okay.
We lost contact for just a moment, so thank you, Kelly. I think we're probably at the end of our time for our agenda. We so much appreciate you joining us and helping us open this dialogue. We've had an incredible day with the work that we've been able to do and the people we've been able to hear from. So, yeah, Kelly, thanks. We'll talk soon.
Okay, thanks everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye. Thank you.
Thanks. So just a time and agenda check. It's a little after 1. We're scheduled to break at 1:20, and that will be followed by our ethics training beginning at 1:30. What I'm going to propose is that we move to agenda item 10.1, which is an update on the HECC agency request budget development process. Take that until 10:20. The Funding and Achievement Subcommittee heard this yesterday, so we'll go over some of the same information, but for a larger group. Take our break, try to get that done by 10:20. Take our break then, and then take up the tuition item after the ethics presentation, and in about the final half hour of our meeting, hopefully adjourning as scheduled at 3.
Are you going to be okay with that?
I need to leave at 3 o'clock.
Okay. Okay. Well, we'll see if we can.
And then I need to leave at 3 also.
Okay. Well, one option would be to take the tuition item now and hold off. You guys were prepared to go this morning, and you may end up going at the end.
That would be good.
All right. Well, let's do it that way then. We'll move to item, and the reason for focusing, this is an action item related to the tuition increase criteria. Good, Jim's prepared to go. The Funding and Achievement Subcommittee heard this yesterday. Briefly, Jim, since most folks, or many folks heard it yesterday, and then I'll get into it.
And good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. Pleasure to be with you. It is really fun to see all of you in person. I feel fantastic, and I hope you do too. For the record, Jim Pinker with Post-Secondary Finance and Capital. We did have a very robust conversation about this yesterday at the FNA and docket item 10.2 the materials. Essentially, today we wanted to talk briefly about the tuition criteria. So we expect one of the 7 public universities to approach us as a commission for permission to raise tuition for next fall higher than 5% for undergraduate resident tuition and mandatory enrollment fees. So the question is, upon which criteria do we base that decision? And so this is a set of criteria listed in your docket item that we have been using since late 2018. As a commission, you signed off on it twice during that time frame. And so at the FNA meeting yesterday, we had a conversation about it, and the FNA Commission Subcommittee did adopt it and forward it for your consideration with one change in the docket item. I believe it's the 3rd paragraph, the paragraph that says it is expected that barring extraordinary circumstances, these criteria shall constitute the only criteria. There was some question about the use of the phrase only, and so the adoption yesterday struck that word out, although that is not a part of the official criteria itself, but as part of the preamble, we did want to set the expectation. So we're trying to balance the subjectivity of the criteria with providing and communicating to the institution certainty around what those criteria are. So I'll pause there for questions and comments, and we can go from there. Again, 3 focus areas listed in the docket item. And again, next May, at the May FNA meeting and the full commission, you'll hear much more about the tuition increases across all 7 public universities. And then at the May full commission, OIT, the one institution that will be requesting a greater than 5% increase, we will have a full and robust conversation about that. They will also join and present themselves about that request, and then I'll provide staff recommendations, and we'll have an opportunity to go through that in detail at that So I'll pause there for questions.
Jim, let me,
Oh, Commissioner Edwards had her hand up.
please.
I'll come back.
Thanks. I'm just confused about the removal of the word other. And can you just explain that trade-off a little bit more and what it means to, only, what it means to take it out, what it means to make it more broad?
I'll speak to that. And then I'll also give a little summary. We had a wonderful discussion, robust discussion, as Jim said, on a lot of items in this. None of them, I want to say before I address your question, Commissioner Edwards, none of them went to the substance, the criteria, which we acknowledged then, and I want to re-acknowledge today. And I think Commissioner Gillard referred to at the beginning of this in 2017. We have been working on it, and the staff has been devoted to it for 5 years to get to where we are. And so there is, as far as I can tell, and I've been on the commission throughout this process, there is deep commitment and appreciation for what has happened to get us here, and also a real belief in these criteria and the partnership we had with the universities in setting these. It was not easy work on anyone's part. So big enthusiasm about that. One of the several good discussion points we had yesterday, I don't know if it was just in our agenda as addendum or if it's in the whole agenda as addendum. One of the things was the question of the special, what's it called, differential tuition, which varies university to university and is for certain programs because of a cost differential. And Commissioner Adams raised the question and was trying to reconcile, and we're thinking, and correct me please if I'm speaking for you imprecisely, but trying to reconcile that we also give a premium and when we calculate the state reimbursement for programs that are thought or do cost more. And so trying to say, okay, well, wait a minute, if we're already accommodating that, then what does it mean to then have, and what does it mean for students to then have the premium for that? And that led to a good discussion, which is going to lead to a further presentation to this group. So that's one of the things we discussed. Now to get back to your question, at the end of all of that, I was the one who raised the question of only because it had jumped out at me in the sentence. It has been used previously, and I think it jumped out at me because the sentence is instructive and commanding anyway when it says shall. That's the meaning of shall, that it instructs you to do something. And so the only is added for emphasis. I was concerned not about whether or not we will hew to the criteria, because we will, and certainly the staff is committed to that. I was really concerned about our position as commissioners, and even with the staff recommendation, let's say the staff at some point said, well, we're not going to recommend this tuition increase because we didn't think it met this criteria. And as commissioners, as individuals, some of us thought, well, no, but there are these extraordinary circumstances and we think it should be approved, or vice versa. So I was really trying to make sure that as individual commissioners, we were not absolutely committed to doing something in lockstep. And that's why I offered that it be removed. And I really appreciate Dana coming forward, Dana Richardson, and heard that concern. Excuse me, my throat's dry. I still think it should be removed. So the way it is coming to you is with its removal, it is of course your prerogative to put it back in if you want. But at any rate, I would still keep it out.
And I'll offer 2 quick comments. And so to Commissioner Rowe's point, In the docket item yesterday for the FAA, there were a number of appendices that were not duplicated for the full commission, but there's all sorts of, and you won't be shocked when I say this, all sorts of good information in there. Baseline information about a 10-year history of annual increases by each university in Appendix B, for example. Lots of good stuff in there if you have a chance to look through that. The second quick comment I'll offer is that removing the word only, I think to Commissioner Rose's point, doesn't technically nor substantially alter the criteria at all. I think our intent as a staff is to both support your decision-making as commissioners and then to support the expectations of all our stakeholders when they ask the question, what do we need to accomplish and how do we approach the commission and what information do we need to provide? So we're really trying to balance those interests. The criteria, as you read through them, they are somewhat subjective still, especially the third one in particular, which we'll likely next month spend a lot of time talking about, because although the criteria kind of sound definitive and, you know, if you do this, this, and this, but there is broad subjectivity in there to the point where some of you may be kind of wondering, you know, how do I make that decision on that topic? So we'll, as best we can as staff, try to provide as much information to support your decision making and certainly partner with you on that next month. But there's always some subjectivity.
Commissioner Skrbowski and then Commissioner Haney.
Thank you so much. I am so reminded of, and I appreciated Dana giving us that reminder this morning about the work that has gone into this. And there's something that we practice in the faculty body right now that has been on the horizon for the past several years, and it's transparent assignment design. I thought the work group was really trying to put together some type of transparency that the institutions really felt that they understood the task. And part of transparency assignment design also has you recognize the process so that it's very clear, and it has you looking at and incorporating the communication, the purpose, the task, and the criteria. And I think of this as being that opportunity to have the same lens for what we're asking for applied across the board to the various institutions that put these things forward for us. You know, I will tell you, as someone who has experienced this from both sitting on the HECC, wanting to very much so meet students where they are, remembering that first tuition experience with our students coming in. And it was traumatizing in so many ways because of the stretch that they were experiencing and the way that they very much so visually as well as verbally articulated that. I think this is an opportunity for us to have that gut check once again. I don't want to lose faith or have the institutions once again refer to us as the HECC. And that emphasis so much will happen. It's like, and what do they want now? What is the HECC doing? And so I feel somewhat sometimes being that Gumby doll in between, like I'm being pulled in this way and my HECC hat's pulling me in that way. But whatever we do needs to be very transparent, that the institutions feel that we respect the work and the workload that goes into preparing these things for us, that the time that we took through the work group and the processes that we went through are respected. And that when the information came forward, having something in there that is feeling overly defining for us at some level, but feels so important to the institutions. And that was the message I felt that Dana was relaying this morning, that we don't lose sight of that it's got to be a place where we come together and meet, and on both sides, there's this belief that we're doing what we need to do to move forward. No one wants to come here and ask for tuition increases. It is not something that is taken lightly. And as the HECC even went to several of the board meetings around the state and watched other institutions go through this process before they came to us, it is a painstaking process that is the last resort of coming before us and asking us to consider the tuition increases that they're asking for. It is very seriously taken to come to this point. So I just want to remind folks about making it very transparent, keeping it transparent, and making folks feel that the work that's done to get to this point is respected and valid, and that we recognize that it's a two-way street. So thank you.
Commissioner Henry.
Thank you, Chair Cross, and I'm really glad I followed that. It says what I would say way more articulately. I think after talking with Dana and after, I think having a greater appreciation for the way in which the universities view this and believing what Jim is saying, that it is probably in practice inconsequential. I probably feel more comfortable leaving the word in. And, I also have a belief, which is another different conversation, and that is that I don't think that this policy can tell you as an individual commissioner how to vote. And I think that was your main concern. Right. And so I think that's a different issue. But I think universities and we as a commission want to be absolutely confident that the work that our agency does is clearly defined within these processes and only within these processes. And I probably feel a little different today than I did yesterday. So.
Commissioner Henry.
Yeah. I'm not terribly wedded to eliminating the word or keeping it, because in a sense, if this was going to be an absolute statement, it would say these criteria shall constitute the only criteria the commission will. But it actually leads off with words. It is expected that barring extraordinary circumstances, which opens the door.
Right.
Basically. Right. But if you even take out the word only, it would say it is expected that barring employ. And to me, by just simple understanding of the language, that would say that if I was going to come up with criteria, it would not be in compliance with this, even without the word only.
Absolutely.
My sense is that the value of the word is the integrity of our relationship with the institutions, and it's a nuance, but it's a nuance that came to be because of a negotiated relationship. And in collaborative work, all aspects of relationship are negotiated. And so I'm hearing leaning towards leaving it out. Madam Vice Chair, are you willing to accept a friendly amendment to your motion yesterday?
I am, with a further comment.
Yes.
And I appreciate everyone rethinking it and the goodwill that goes into this. I hope that the integrity of our relationship, even in this limited context with the universities, doesn't depend on this. So I hope you're wrong about that. I worry a little bit that there's a little piece of you that's right, because I think in addition to reading it, to wanting to make sure that we had our own independence in this, I also read its phrasing as a bit of a hammer, as a bit of making sure that the commission, both staff and commissioners, are boxed in on this. And I say that from the history of listening in meetings to the way this was approached at the beginning. So perhaps I remembered a little bit too much of the history on this, and it wasn't always in the spirit of full faith and confidence and trustful negotiations. And even looking at it from the outside, it was a lot of headbutting, and I saw this as left over from that. But having made that comment and hearing the will of the commissioners, I am happy to withdraw it. I just wanted to get that on the record and to say it with with gratefulness to my colleagues.
I think with that, we're ready for a motion to approve the criteria for tuition.
So
Oh, thank you.
I will second.
Second by Craig. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
I,
And all opposed, same sign. Abstentions. Motion carries. Thank you so much. It's time, let's take our break. Let's make it 10 minutes. We'll come back and finish up. We have our presentation at 1:30.
That's correct. Yeah, we'll start.
Okay. See you in a few minutes.
I didn't mean to work. Sorry, it takes so much more.
I think it was important to say what you said.
Relationship building.
Bring like coffee or chocolate or fresh. Would you like coffee or chocolate?
Surely close.
You didn't have lunch. I feel bad though.
No, you
I was
shouldn't.
like
Why?
eating.
Still.
Why would you feel bad?
Because I don't want to do other people or nothing. But you know, again, I was like having a good time eating the egg sandwich, and I was like, oh,
Well, yeah, you're assuming that eating would be a good time for me.
I don't know. I feel like food 24/7 should be. I like it.
Well, you're also young.
I like the socks though. It threw me off because we were doing our meetings. Oh, personality right there. I know so many people from there's this one professor who had a sock for his face.
Yeah, my question.
And it really appreciated off, but it's his way of getting their attention very class. And so what people keep looking at this.
All right, we're ready to
It just
reconvene.
reminded me of that. I was like,
Our
I like
next
chuckle
agenda
for 5
item
seconds.
is our
Opportunities
training
to have some
on
flair.
Oregon ethics law. So
Try to do it.
I'd ask everyone's attention, and we have Stephanie Hector, did I get that right? Who's joined us from Oregon Government Ethics Commission to provide our training this afternoon. Thank you, welcome.
And I think as Stephanie's getting started, I just want to let her know that in addition to the handful of commissioners who you see here in the room, we have another set of commissioners who are joined online. So we have the majority of the commissioners present and paying attention, and thanks Stephanie for leading us in this training today.
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me to present today. Thank you very much. As I was introduced, my name is Stephanie, and I help people navigate the nuances of Oregon government ethics law through providing trainings and staff advice. And the purpose of today's presentation is really to increase your understanding of how Oregon government ethics law applies to you as a public official. And so hopefully, as a result of this session, I'm going to give you a couple examples, and hopefully you can spot whether or not an ethics violation has occurred in those examples. The reason that we're here today is that the Legislative Assembly declared that service as a public official is a public trust, and that as one safeguard for that trust, the people require all public officials to comply with the applicable provisions of ORS Chapter 244. This means that each of us may make a personal judgment in deciding such matters as the use of our official position for financial gain, what gifts are appropriate for us to accept, and then when we need to disclose any natures of conflict of interest. Since compliance is our personal responsibility, it is our responsibility individually to familiarize ourselves with the provisions of Oregon government ethics law. Now, the training material I cover today is intended to explain the requirements of Oregon government ethics law, as well as provide the Oregon Government Ethics Commission's interpretation on those requirements. However, the information in this session is not to be used as a substitute for a review of specific statutes and rules. And the statutes and rules discussed in this training do not and cannot address every set of circumstances we as public officials may encounter. But our commission staff are available when needed to discuss any issues and offer guidance in making such judgments. The information in this training is not designed to be a substitute for legal advice, and as such should not be viewed as constituting legal advice. And then we also have to caution that there may be other laws or regulations that are not within our jurisdiction that may apply to situations you come across in the course of your work. So you will need to refer to your own policies and laws as well. And then ultimately, if you have any questions, the biggest thing I want you to walk away with today is that our staff is available Monday through Friday from 8 to 5 to provide you with assistance. So we're going to start with a little short background about Oregon government ethics law that is contained in the Oregon Revised Statutes, Chapter 244. It was enacted by Oregon voters in 1974 during the Watergate era as really a way to reestablish public trust in government. It's important for us to not only be aware of these laws, but to comply with them to avoid violation, again, as it is our personal responsibility as public officials, not our governing bodies. When the commission was formed to regulate government ethics law, sorry, I messed that up, but that's okay. The commission is made up of nine volunteer members who are appointed by the governor and the legislative assembly, as well as confirmed by a vote of the Senate. And then we have a relatively small commission staff consisting of 9 of us, and collectively we are charged with enforcing government ethics law. When we were established, we were given jurisdiction to implement and enforce the provisions in Chapter 244, and those prohibit public officials from using their respective offices or positions for financial gain or avoidance of financial detriment, and require public disclosures of economic conflicts of interest. In addition, we also have jurisdiction over ORS Chapter 171, the provisions that enforce state laws, which require lobbyists and the entities they represent to register and periodically report their expenditures. And then the third area of our jurisdiction is ORS Chapter 192, which .660, which covers just the executive session provisions of Oregon Public Meetings Law. But today, as I mentioned before, we're going to be looking at ORS Chapter 244. So what's contained in ORS Chapter 244 is financial benefits that are allowed and what's prohibited by the law. Regulations around private and subsequent employment and how the law applies to private income producing activities and the limits on private and subsequent employment, as well as the limit placed on public officials who authorize contracts in subsequent employment. Conflicts of interest, so what constitutes or determines that conflict of interest, and then how to handle it if you are faced with one. Nepotism, which is the employment of relatives and household members, and rules against nepotism. Gifts, so again, how the provisions apply to those occasions when we're offered something of economic value, and whether or not it's considered a gift, and if we have any limitations placed on us to accept that gift. We'll also review the sanctions and the complaint process. And then lastly, I will go over some agency resources. So again, ultimately, if you walk away, when you walk away from this, I just hope that you realize who you can turn to if you have questions. Now, there are some occasions when public officials engage in conduct that may be viewed as unethical, but that conduct may not be governed by Oregon government ethics law. The following areas are some examples that we hear of conduct by public officials, but that may not be within the authority of the commission to address. So that's things like an elected official making promises or claims that are not acted upon, public officials mismanaging or exercising poor judgment when administering public money, public officials being rude or unmannerly, a person's private behavior that's completely unrelated to their actions as a public official. So while the conduct described may not address the Oregon government ethics laws, there may be other statutes and public agency policies that may prohibit or readdress this behavior that is outside our jurisdiction. But if you need any further clarification regarding how the ethics laws may apply to a circumstance you may encounter, please don't hesitate to reach out to the commission. So first, it's really important that we start with a discussion of some key statutory definitions before we dive into the actual legislation. Or, excuse me, the provisions. So first of all, you are a public official if you are serving the state of Oregon, any city, county, special district, or any other public body. So this is regardless of whether you're compensated for your service or not. It's estimated that there are over 200,000 public officials in the state of Oregon, and many of whom are not paid for their service, such as those of you that may be serving on the commission. The definition includes public employees, elected officials, members of boards, councils, and commissions, as well as volunteers. So it doesn't matter if you're an employee or a volunteer, if you're serving a public body, you are a public official and therefore responsible for complying with the Oregon Government Ethics Law. So who is a relative? The statute very narrowly defines a relative to include your spouse, your children and stepchildren and their spouses, so their daughters or son-in-laws, your parents or step-parents, your siblings or step-siblings, and then your spouse's family. So your spouse's children, parents, and siblings. The statute, notice the statute does not include those extended family members such as nieces, nephews, aunts, cousins, etc. A relative, though, also includes three other definitions. So it is also defined as anyone who you have a support obligation to, anyone receiving benefits of your employment as a public official, and anyone from which you receive a benefit of employment from. So we have to be aware that there are provisions in the law that are going to restrict or prohibit when we may use our office or the position we hold to benefit a relative, or may limit the value of financial benefits a relative can accept, or may require us to disclose a nature of conflict of interest when a relative of ours may receive a financial benefit. So the next one is household members. And as public officials, we also have to consider those members of our household. Now, the definition is pretty straightforward on this one. A member of our household is any person who lives in our home. This could be foster children, exchange students, significant others, cousins, or even our best friend. If they're residing under our roof, then they are a member of our household. And again, as a public official, we should not only exercise sound judgment when participating in actions that could result in personal financial benefits to us, but we should also exercise sound judgment when participating in actions that could result in a financial benefit for a relative or a member of our household. Now, a business is defined as any legal entity operated for financial gain, or for economic gain, excuse me. And examples include things like corporations, partnerships, firms, enterprises, franchises, associations, proprietorships, and self-employed individuals. Ultimately, it's any business created and operated for economic gain. And it's important to note that a business is not a public body, such as HECC or OGEC, nor is it a tax-exempt, a tax-exempt 501c, 501c if you or a relative are associated only as a member or on the board of directors or in another non-paid capacity. So 501c nonprofit is not considered a business if your relationship to them is only in an unpaid capacity. So when it comes to businesses, each of us have to determine if we or our relative or a member of our household owns a business that could be economically affected by our official actions, decisions, votes, or recommendations. And these are called businesses with which we are associated with. So we have to determine, again, if we ourselves or our relatives are associated with a business that could be economically affected by our official actions, decisions, votes, or recommendations. So to assess if a business is one with which you are associated with, there are two categories of business. So the first is any private business or closely held corporation of which we, the public official or our relative, is a director, officer, owner, employee, or agent. The other is any publicly held corporation of which we, the official or a relative of ours, is a director or an officer. Now, they are also defined as, in the case of a private business or closely held corporation, if you or a relative has owned or owns stock another form of equity interest, stock options, or debt instruments worth $1,000 or more at any point in the preceding calendar year, then it would be a business with which you are associated. In the case of a publicly held corporation, the same would be true, but it would be those stocks or debt instruments worth $100,000 or more at any point in the preceding calendar year. So now we're ready to dig into the 7 provisions of Chapter 244. I'm actually going to come back to that in just a moment. So what is prohibited use of official position or office? As a public official, you may not use or attempt to use your official position to obtain financial gain or avoid the financial detriment for yourself, a relative or member of your household, or any business with which you or a relative or your member of your household is associated, if the financial gain or avoidance of financial detriment would not otherwise be available, but for holding your official position. So again, as a public official, you may not use or attempt to use your official position of office to obtain financial gain or avoid financial detriment. Now, there can be a variety of actions that we may take that could potentially constitute a violation or attempted violation of official use of office. So these include actions such as voting in a public meeting, placing our signature on a government agency document, making a recommendation, making a purchase with government agency funds, conducting personal activities on government agency time or with government agency resources, which includes tangible things like computers and vehicles, office equipment, but also includes things like colleagues' time. So really the key to determining whether something is allowed by the law or not is to ask ourselves, do I only have this opportunity because the position I hold? And if the answer is yes, then the action is probably prohibited. So as an example, say a public works employee had the opportunity to use the department leaf blower over the weekend at their own home, they would have to ask themselves, do I have this opportunity only because of the position I hold? Now, if the leaf blower is not available to any person in the community to use and is only available to them because they work for the department, then yes, it is only available to them because they're a public official. So borrowing the leaf blower would be a violation of the law. Now, in contrast, say a librarian had wanted to print a 10-page document at the library. Again, they'd have to ask themselves, do I only have this opportunity because the position I hold? Now, say the library is open to the public and any person can use the computers to print 10 pages for free, then no, this opportunity is not available to them because they are a public official. So the law would allow for them to print that 10-page document. Now, there are a number of circumstances that the law has identified in which you as a public official may use your position to accept a financial benefit that would not be otherwise available but for your holding your position as a public official. So we're going to go through some of those exceptions. The first is official compensation. So public officials may accept any financial benefit that is identified by the public body that they serve as part of the official compensation package of the public official. If the public body identifies such benefits as salary, health insurance, or various paid allowances in the public agreement or contract of the public official, those benefits are part of the official compensation package. The next is honoraria. We're allowed to accept honoraria, but it's important that we follow with the definition as it is in the statutes. So honoraria is payment or something of economic value given to a public official in exchange for providing a service such as a speech or a presentation in connection with events. It's also important for me to point out here, though, that there are agencies that may have more restrictive policies in place. So, for example, for any policy, so for example, at OGEC, we are not allowed to accept honorarium. So, in that case, the more restrictive policy would take precedence. It's only when there is not a more restrictive policy in place, then you would need to refer to the government ethics laws and rules. The next is reimbursements of expenses. So payments from your public body as a reimbursement for expense that you have personally paid while conducting official business is allowed. So, you know, parking fees, event registration fees, things of that nature. And then that brings us to gifts. So we will have a chance to dive a little bit deeper into gifts, but in a moment, but we'll touch on it here to start with. So we can accept gifts of not more than $50 in any given calendar year from a source that has a legislative or administrative interest in what we do as a public official. Now, there are going to be circumstances in which there are no limits on the quantity or aggregate value of gifts that we can accept. That is, if the gift is from a source that cannot reasonably be identified as having that legislative or administrative interest in our decisions, actions, votes, or recommendations that we're making in our official capacity. Additionally, there are 16 gift exception provisions to the law. And again, we'll talk a little bit further about that towards the end of the presentation. It's also important I note, and I'll bring it up again, that there may be reporting requirements that apply to public officials who accept certain gift exceptions or gifts. The next is awards for professional achievement. So we may accept an award if we have not solicited the award, and the award is offered to recognize a professional achievement. So awards for professional achievement should not be confused with awards of appreciation, honorary, or gifts that are allowed or restricted by the provisions in Chapter 244. And then the last one that I'm going to touch on right now is the contributions to the Legal Expense Trust Fund. So there are provisions in the law that allow us to establish a legal expense trust fund. And they allow for us to solicit funds for the established trust, accept those funds, and be the trustee for contributions to the established fund. Now, ultimately, we just have to remember public officials cannot use their position or office to gain a financial benefit or avoid a financial detriment, the opportunity for which would not be available but for the holding of their position or office. And a public official cannot use public money, equipment, or other resources for personal activities, even if it results in no cost for the public body. So we're gonna have we're gonna take a deeper dive into a situation. So the first one is the question: you own rental properties and one of your renters is looking for work. You've developed a close relationship with a HECC partner who has a job opening available. You contact the partner and recommend your renter for the job. Have you violated ethics law? And the answer to this is going to be yes. And the reason is that you have created a possible personal financial benefit or avoidance of financial loss for yourself. You used your position to create an opportunity for your renter, which could be a financial gain for you ultimately, as it should ensure that your renter continues or is able to pay for your rent. Now, some questions. But what if instead it was one of your lifelong best friends that you're recommending for the job? Would doing so violate Oregon government ethics law? And the answer to this one is no. So unless your best friend is a member of your household, being a best friend alone is not considered a relative by the definitions listed in Chapter 244. Therefore, you have not created an opportunity for you, a relative, or a member of your household to gain financially. So we're going to talk briefly about private employment. We're going to skip this. So Oregon government ethics law does not prohibit us from owning a private business or working for a private employer while continuing employment with or holding a position with a public body. Many public officials are volunteers, as I know you all are aware, meaning that there is little to no compensation for your public position. Now, other public officials may receive compensation, but choose to seek additional sources of income. Some may work for a private business, while others may establish a private business of their own. The law prohibits us, though, from directly or indirectly soliciting or attempting the promise of future employment based on the understanding that the offer is influenced by our official votes, official actions, or judgments. Any employer who may directly or indirectly offer under these conditions may also violate this provision. In general, public officials may obtain employment with a private employer or engage in private income-producing activities of their own. However, we must not use our official position to create an opportunity for additional personal income. And again, we must also ensure that there is a clear distinction between the use of personal resources and time for personal income producing activities and the use of our public body's time and resources. So the commission has created a guideline for public officials to follow in order to avoid violating Oregon government ethics law when engaged in private or personally owned businesses. So some of these we've already touched on, but we'll go over them in their entirety. The first is use no governmental body time. So again, making sure there is that clear distinction between your governmental body time and your personal income producing activity. Using no governmental body resources. So in addition, again, to those tangible items such as laptops, computers, it could be internet access. It could also be your colleagues' time. Take no official action that could financially impact your private enterprise. Use no confidential information obtained through your position as a public official. And disclose all conflicts of interest, which we will get into in just a moment. So here's another scenario for us to take a look at. You recently worked on a vendor contract. Oops, this one's not correct. I apologize for that. And it shouldn't even be there. So we'll come to that in just a moment. We'll just do it now. You recently worked on a vendor contract for the HECC. The vendor now has a job opening that is a perfect fit for you. You have a great rapport with the company and you'd get to work under the same contract you updated for the state. Should you apply? So now we're going to switch gears and look into public contracts. Okay. So employment and contracts. Contracts, ORS 244 has specified provisions related to contracts and subsequent employment. A public official who has authorized a public contract cannot legally work under that contract for a period of 2 years from the date of authorization. Now, the law defines authorizing as performing a significant role in selecting a contractor or executing the contract, recommending for approval, signing the contract, etc. Now, this restriction does not apply to a person such as a member of a commission who did not participate in the authorization of the contract when it was authorized. So, for example, if you were not present at the meeting where the contract was approved and or authorized, then you would not be seen as someone who authorized the contract. Skipping this one. Okay, so here's another scenario for you. In addition to being a board member, you own a business. Can you advertise your business by passing out your business cards, displaying flyers in state offices, or delivering orders to colleagues at the state office? The answer is no, because this would be a use of office or position violation, because you're using governmental body resources for personal financial gain. Now, if you were to do this outside the office, then that would be okay. If the flyers, if you wanted, if it was a bulletin board where the general public could post their flyers, then that would be okay. But in general, the answer would be no. And then that next one is that we're going to look at again is that contract one. So you recently worked on a vendor contract for HECC, and the vendor now has that job opening. That would be so perfect. You have a great rapport with them and you would get to work under that same contract. Should you apply? The answer is no, because you would be prohibited from accepting the position for a period of 2 years from the date of the last review or authorization of the contract based on the public contract provision we just covered. I apologize for the out of orderness there. So conflicts of interest. Let's dig into that. Oregon government ethics law has defined 2 types of conflict of interest, an actual conflict of interest and a potential conflict of interest. A public official is met with a conflict of interest when they participate in an official action which could or would result in a personal, pecuniary, financial benefit or avoidance of a financial detriment to themselves, a relative, or a business with which they or their relative is associated with. So you see those definitions coming back in. So let's take a look at actual conflicts of interest. It is any action, decision, or recommendation made by you while working in the capacity as an official, which would be to the private pecuniary benefit or detriment to yourself as the public official, your relatives, or any business that you or your relative was associated, meaning the action would with certainty create a financial effect. Now, with a potential conflict of interest is any action, decision, or recommendation made by you while working in the capacity as a public official, which could be to the private pecuniary benefit or detriment to yourself as the public official, your relatives, or any businesses that you or your relatives are associated with, meaning that the financial effect is not certain. So really the difference between actual and potential conflict of interest is determined by the certainty of the private financial impact. If your action, decision, or recommendation would or could result in a personal financial benefit or detriment to you or your relative, you may be met with a conflict of interest and therefore would have to comply with the appropriate disclosure and disposition requirements. So in order to be met with a conflict of interest, just to summarize, one must be met with the following conditions. The action that you're going to take, whether it being a vote, action, decision, or recommendation, must be an official action. The official action taken would or could result in a private financial benefit or avoidance of financial detriment, and the result of the official action and financial gain or avoidance of loss must affect either the public official themselves, a relative, or a business with which the public official or relative is associated with. Regardless of whether it's potential or actual, you still need to comply with the appropriate disclosure and disposition requirements by declaring that conflict. So how do you do it? So what do we do when we're faced with a conflict? And I know that many of you know this, but there are 2 different methods for disposing conflicts of interest, and it depends on your role as a public official. So we'll take a look at both, but one is for individuals serving on boards and commissions and elected officials, and the other one is for employees or appointed officials. Let's start with officials serving on commissions and boards. If an elected official other than a member of the Legislative Assembly or an appointed official serving on a board or commission are met with a potential conflict of interest, you must announce it publicly the nature of the potential conflict prior to taking any action. When you're met with an actual conflict of interest, again, you have to announce publicly the nature of the actual conflict, but you then have to refrain from participating in any discussion or debate on the issue in which the actual conflict arises, and you also have to refrain from voting on the issue. It's important to note that the announcement or the disclosure of the nature of the conflict needs to be made on each occasion when you are met with a conflict of interest. So if you have something on your agenda in April that you have a conflict of interest and it comes back up in a public on the agenda in October, you would need to announce both times the nature of your conflict of interest. For individuals that are faced with an actual conflict of interest, we recommend after that you state for the record that you have an actual conflict of interest, that you also state for the record that you're leaving the room, and then get up and do so, whether that be virtually or in person. I know for virtually means leaving the meeting temporarily, and waiting in the waiting room. Someone can text you and let you know when you can get back in. If you're meeting in person, actually physically leaving the room, and then someone can let you know when the item being discussed is finished. And I know that this may seem relatively silly, but if a complaint were filed, what we have to rely on is the public record, and having that public record is really helpful in substantiating any claims that you may make that you followed the appropriate disclosure and disposition procedures. Now, there is an exception to this. If your vote's necessary to meet a requirement, such as a minimum number of votes, there is an exception to the voting piece. The official can vote if their vote is needed for a quorum. However, you still cannot participate in any discussion or debate on the matter, and a public announcement and declaration of the nature of the actual conflict must still be made prior to voting. So first, you must publicly announce your conflict of interest. You may not participate in the discussion or debate in this scenario, but you may vote. Now, this exception only applies when there are enough members of the public body present and its multiple members are met with a conflict. Then that is why the quorum is unmet. Not because the quorum is unmet, because members are absent. Now, employees have a different method of handling conflicts of interest when they are met with either an actual or a potential conflict of interest. They have to notify their manager, supervisor, or director the nature of the conflict and request that the matter giving rise to the conflict be disclosed of. And again, same situation, they have to declare or notify provide notice of the conflict each occasion the conflict arises. We recommend that you keep any written records regarding the conflict and its resolution. Now, it is the public body's responsibility to record all notices of conflict of interest, regardless of whether that is coming from a commissioner or it's coming from an employee. That can be recording the minutes of the meeting and keeping those. And it can also be keeping notes of, or keeping the written notices of the conflict of interest that the employee has submitted. The supervisor, once the public official has notified their supervisor, they must record the conflict in the official record, respond by assigning someone else to the task, or instruct the individual on how to proceed or handle the matter at hand. In addition, if you're discussing a particularly contentious issue, a conflict of interest and how it was disposed of may be provided to the Oregon Government Ethics Commission at any time if you just want to make us aware of something. So let's take a look at some conflicts of interest. So I actually have one here. In addition to being a commission member, you are also employed by a higher education institution. The commission is discussing whether to alter tuition, which I know you're having discussions on. Would you be met with a conflict of interest? And the answer for this one is no. So this is taken from advice that we issued in 2019 and is available through our website. But a commission member would not be met with a conflict of interest when taking official actions as a commissioner on a proposal to alter the amount of tuition charged by the university they work for several reasons. The first is the effect of their official action would be to the financial benefit or detriment of their employer and not themselves. And government entities such as public universities are not operated for businesses and thus are not businesses with which you are associated. Any member of the HECC Commission is themselves, if any member is themselves a student or has a relative that would be financially affected, the conflict of interest class exception that the advice also goes into would then apply. And thirdly, if the employee, as part of their official compensation, receives a reduced state tuition rate for themselves or their relative, their official action would affect all employees to the same degree, so that would also apply as a class exception. So now let's talk about nepotism. Nepotism includes your relatives and members of your household per the definitions we discussed earlier. Now, after first complying with any conflict of interest provisions, which most often require refraining from participating, but public officials cannot directly engage in any personnel action taken by a public employer that would impact the employment of a relative or member of our household. In addition, we cannot participate in any interview, discussion, or debate taken by our public agency that would impact the employment of our relative or member of our household. That said, however, if we are assigned duties that include performing ministerial acts related to any stage of the relative's employment, we are not prohibited from performing such acts. Ministerial acts would include mailing or filing forms or correspondence, taking and relaying messages, scheduling appointments, or preparing documents and minutes for public meetings. Now, I know as a public official, you may also serve as a reference or provide a recommendation for a relative who has applied for a position of employment, promotion, or is subject to personnel action. So the difference between this one and the first one I brought up with your renter is that that when you are reaching out to the vendor to create a position for someone. However, with this one, they are listing you they have already applied and they are listing you for a recommendation. So there is a difference there. In addition, we may not directly supervise our relatives or household members unless our public body has adopted policies specifying when we as public officials can act in an official capacity and may directly supervise a person who's a relative or a member of our household. Now, with everything, there's exceptions. So the exception to this provision only applies to unpaid volunteers who provide services to the public body in an unpaid capacity. So public officials can supervise and participate in personnel actions of relatives or household members who are unpaid volunteers. However, this provision does not apply to unpaid volunteers who serve or seek appointment to a governing body of a public body, such as a board, a commission, a council. So I didn't have a question for that one for you all. So we're going to just move right into gifts because everybody likes gifts. Now, in some circumstances, there are restrictions on the monetary value of a gift that as a public official we're allowed to receive. Oregon government ethics law establishes a framework of conditions for public officials to apply when they or your relatives or members of your household are offered some gifts. So if offered a gift, we have to analyze the offer and decide if it's something of value and if it can be accepted with or without restrictions. So first, what is a gift? Well, it's something of economic value that's given to the public official or the public official's relative or household member, and it's given without payment or other consideration. And it's something that's not offered to others who are not public officials, their relatives or household members, on the same terms and conditions. Oregon government ethics law does not prohibit us from accepting gifts, but it does place a direct and personal responsibility on each of us to understand when there are circumstances that the aggregate value of the gifts that we receive may be restricted. In order to determine if ethics law places restrictions on a particular gift, we have to know two things. The first is, who is the source of the gift? And the second, if that source has a legislative or administrative interest in us as a public official that is distinct from that of the general public. So do they have an interest in our actions, decisions, votes, or recommendations that we make while we're acting in our official capacity? Although it may not always be readily apparent, it's our responsibility to know or to find out who the actual source of a gift is that's being given to us. Gifts may be received anonymously, and that can make it virtually impossible to identify the source and determine whether the source has any economic interest in us as a public official. However, the burden lies on the receiver of the gift, not the giver of the gift. So again, it is our responsibility as public officials to determine whether or not we can accept a gift. It's also important to note that this only applies when a gift is given to an individual, such as an individual that's a public official, versus the gift being given to an entire agency or office. And in that case, it would be up to the director or the head of the agency to determine how to handle the distribution of the gift. Oh, so the other thing I do want to mention on this one is, if you do not know the source of the gift and you cannot return it, then it is our recommendation that you donate it to a nonprofit of your choosing, and then you just keep record of that, of how you disposed of the gift, so that if a complaint were filed, you would have record of that. Now, if you do donate it to a nonprofit, you cannot take the tax write-off for that donation, because that would be an economic benefit, financial benefit for receiving the gift. So that is not allowed. Now, what is a legislative or administrative interest? I've mentioned that many times. And so a legislative or administrative interest is one in which someone has an interest in our decisions or votes that we make, that we make in our capacity as a public official, that's different from that of the general public. So when we apply the phrase legislative or administrative interest, we have to consider first who the source is, and second, how that source would or could be affected by what we do in our official capacity. If the source would or could be affected, then we need to analyze whether that effect is distinct from that general public. So what makes something an interest different from that of the general public? So if the source has an economic interest in what you do as a public official, that economic interest is an interest that involves a monetary gain or loss that could or would occur by actions taken by the public official doing their work. So again, through their decisions, actions, votes, or recommendations. And again, that's different or distinct from that of the public because the economic impact or interest is not felt or experienced by members of the general public in the same manner as the source of the gift. So some examples include private contractors who have an economic interest in a public body's authority to award contracts, and that economic interest is going to be distinct from that by members of the general public. Real estate developers would have an economic interest in a public body's authority to approve subdivision applications, and a textbook publisher or distributor may have an economic interest in a public body's authority to award contracts to purchase books, etc. So many votes or decisions that we make as public officials have the same general impact on all members of the general public. So that is something we have to keep in mind. Again, if the source of the gift has an interest, any gift offered to us, a relative or a member of our household, may only be offered and accepted under the conditions set forth within the law. However, if the source of the gift does not have a legislative or administrative interest, gifts are not restricted or prohibited. So for those that do have an economic interest in us as a public official, there are some limitations and restrictions that apply. We cannot solicit gifts, rather directly or indirectly, and Oregon government ethics law does limit the gifts that we may receive if the source could be reasonably be known to have an interest distinct from that of the general public in our decisions when acting in our official capacity. If the source is reasonably known to have that interest, i.e. their interest, then we would have to limit our acceptance of the gift to $50 per calendar year from the source of the gift. If, however, the source does not have an interest in the actions or decisions or recommendations we make, then the gift provision or limitation does not apply. And again, you're free to accept the gift even if it exceeds $50. And that only occurs when there's a legislative or administrative impact. Now, when we talk about legislative and administrative impact, one great way to look at it is looking at it kind of like internally with our colleagues. So when applying the concept of the legislative or administrative interest internally with our coworkers or managers, the provisions apply when our colleagues are above us in the chain of command. We could have an administrative interest in those higher up from us as they have a say in our employment, leave requests, salary, etc. They have to monitor and limit their receipt of gifts to us from us to $50 in a calendar year. On the flip side, however, we can receive gifts without limitation from our managers and coworkers that are higher ranking from us, as they do not have an administrative interest in us. So again, the provisions only apply when the giving is going from the bottom up and not the top down. Also of note, just as we have to determine if our colleagues have an economic interest in us, we also have to determine if vendors or stakeholders have an economic interest in what we're doing as public officials when we're accepting those gifts. If they have an economic interest, again, we have to limit the gifts to $50 per calendar year per single vendor or stakeholder. And that can even apply to things such as gifts at conference. So often we get this question, can I accept a gift at a conference? It really depends on who the source of the gift is. Who is the ultimate payer of the gift? What economic interest may they have in you as a public official? Do they want you to continue to pay your dues? Do they want you to use their product? Do they want continuation or expansion of their contracts, etc.? So those are things that we have to analyze when we accept even things that seem kind of trivial, such as something that may be given at a conference. So what is not considered a gift? I already mentioned earlier that something of monetary value that's supplied to a public official by their agency is not a gift. If it's coming from your employer, it would be analyzed or looked at as part of your official compensation package. And then a gift given to a public official that's available to the general public alike under the same terms and conditions is also not a gift. So that may be a swag bag at a convention that's open to the general public. In that case, because it is open to the general public, then you would be allowed to accept it. Free coffee at your local coffee stand on Thursday mornings. They're offering it to everyone, not just you because of your role as a public official. Maybe you receive something in the mail at home that was offering you a free pass to something, and they send it to everyone in your neighborhood. Then you would be allowed to accept that. That would not be considered a gift. Now, as I mentioned before, there are 16 exceptions to the gift definition that we may accept without limit. And some of those examples are unsolicited tokens of awards of appreciation, gifts from our relatives or members of our household, incidental food and beverages. So that means like at a meeting where there happens to be muffins and coffee, definitely not a gift. You can drink the coffee, you can eat the muffin. Ceremonial entertainment, maybe you are given tickets to the Blazers to accept one of those ceremonial checks at halftime, and you're going to be there in your official capacity, and they've given you tickets so that you can be there for that ceremony, then that would qualify as ceremonial entertainment. Informational or program material that's related to your position. Publications or subscriptions that are related to the performance of your official duties, continuing education materials or registration waivers, travel paid by another public official as long as it's within the state of Oregon. does not count if it is out of state travel. And then anything offered to you as a usual and customary practice of your personal private business or employment or volunteer position that bears no relationship on your public official's office. So say you serve on the board of a nonprofit, and every year the members of the board and their spouses go on a leadership retreat and all the expenses are paid for. That would fall under this exception. It is a usual and customary practice of that nonprofit, and it has no bearing on your relationship, no bearing on your public office. So we'll take a look at a couple more in depth. So this next one is food and beverage exception. So if you attend a reception or meal or meeting in which food and beverage is provided as part of the event, that is considered not a gift. So admission provided to or the cost of food or beverage consumed by you, your relatives, or members of your household or staff when they're accompanying you at a reception, meal, or meeting held by an organization when you are representing your government agency is not considered a gift. Now, the next one is food, lodging, and travel expenses under subsection F, paid by any unit of government, so that would be federal, state, or local, or a Native American tribe that's federally recognized or formally acknowledged by a state, a membership organization when that's paid for by your governing body, or a nonprofit corporation that's a tax exempt under 501c3. So this is when travel is paid, travel, food, and lodging expenses are paid for you by one of these entities that's not the entity that is your employer. So this is someone other than your employer. And they are paying for you to attend a convention, a fact-finding mission or trip, conference, or other meeting where you are scheduled to deliver a speech, make a presentation, participate on a panel or in a panel discussion, or represent your governing body. Now, with this one, they are required to give you a receipt or notice of the expenses they paid within 10 days after the event. And this is also a question on your SEI reports, your annual SEI reporting, and would be one of the two times where you would have to upload additional documentation. So you would have to upload that receipt or notice. Now, food, lodging, and travel under subsection H is also a question on your annual statement of economic interest report. This one's slightly different. So this is, again, for a public official, a relative, a household member, or their staff when the public official represents their governing body on an officially sanctioned trade promotion or fact-finding mission, or in an officially designated negotiations or economic development activities. Travel for this requirement can be within the United States or international, but the receipt of these expenses have to be approved in advance and in writing by your governing body. So for this one, it only has to be reported on your annual SEI report, but you do not have to upload any supplemental information. So this would be 4B. The other one's 4A. What if I'm offered a gift? Again, you need to know the source and the value of the gift in order to properly analyze whether or not you can accept it. And if so, then you need to know if it's with or without restrictions. So you have to ask yourselves, is it offered to others who are not public officials, nor my relatives or household members? Is it offered under the same terms and conditions as the general public? Is the source of the gift reasonably known to have a legislative or administrative interest in my votes or decision making? And is the gift within the limitations at $50 in a calendar year? Or does it fall with any of the 16 gift exceptions? And I understand it can be really confusing to try to determine whether or not those gift exceptions apply. So we always encourage you, if you are unsure, to give us a call, and we're happy to discuss the details with you. So as I mentioned earlier, say you're attending a convention that's open to the general public. Can you accept a vendor swag bag, free swag bag? Would it be considered a gift? And the answer is no. As I mentioned earlier, because it's open to the general public, that would be allowed and not considered a gift. Now, say a conference organizer is a 501c nonprofit, C3, excuse me, nonprofit, and you're invited to participate on a panel discussion on behalf of HECC. The conference organizer offers to pay your travel and waive your registration fees for attending the conference. Can you accept the payment? And the answer is yes. And that would fall under that food, lodging, and travel exception. So before I just wrap up with the last pieces, just want to take a pause and see if there are any questions so far about these items that we've discussed. Okay. And if something pops up and you have a question, you can always reach out to me afterwards, as I understand bringing these things up in meetings are not always the best. So in terms of the complaint and review process, I think it's really important everyone is aware of what our process looks like. Any person may file a signed written complaint alleging that there may have been a violation of Oregon government ethics law, lobby regulation, or the executive session provisions of Oregon Public Meetings law. We cannot accept any anonymous complaints. They must be signed, and it must state the person's reasons for believing that the violation may have occurred, and we also ask them to include any evidence to support that belief. Once we receive them, then they were reviewed by our executive director to see if they're within our jurisdiction. And if there is reason to believe that there may have been a violation of the law within our jurisdiction, we will open an investigation. When a complaint is accepted, the public official against whom the allegations are made will be notified of the complaint and provided with any of the information we have received in the complaint and the identity of the complainant. We have 60 days for this first preliminary phase, called the preliminary review phase, and the commission has to act on the complaint within that time period. Now, if it's brought before the commission and the commission dismisses it, the matter is concluded and both the respondent and the complainant will be notified. But if there is cause found to investigate, then the investigatory phase begins, and that is limited to 180 days. We do want to remind people, just because a complaint moves from the review phase to the investigation phase, it doesn't mean that a violation has been found or necessarily has occurred. It just means that the commission needs additional information to make that determination. And then once the investigation is concluded, if a violation has been found, the respondent can either opt to pay the assessed fines, work with the commission on a settlement of the case, request a hearing, or ignore the settlement. If the investigation is concluded and no violations are found, then both the respondent and the complainant will be notified. Now, there are some sanctions for violations. For civil penalties, it has a $5,000 maximum. For willful violation, it's $10,000. For forfeiture, it's twice the amount of any financial benefit realized from the ethics violation. But most often, we issue letters of reprimand or explanation or education. But ultimately, before it gets even to the complaint or investigation and sanction phase, we just recommend contacting our office. We're here happy to assist you. We're open Monday through Friday, 8 to 5. So please don't hesitate to give us a call. I do want to point out some resources on our website. You can look up previous advice and opinions, such as the one that I brought to you all through our website under this section here. At the top of the website, under public records, you can do a public records search where you can look up any statement of economic interest filer reports or any lobbyist registration economic or expenditure reports, sorry, lobbyist expenditure reports. We also have a link to the guide for public officials on the website and information as well under the training section. I want to, before I wrap up, I also want to thank those of you who have completed your statement of economic interest reports already. Just a reminder, those are due tomorrow, April 15th. And when I last checked this morning, there does appear to be a small amount of people who haven't yet completed this. So this is just a gentle reminder, because again, want to help you avoid those sanctions. If you need any assist with filing, please don't hesitate to call our office. I know people are having problems resetting their passwords. Maybe it's your first time and you just don't understand the questions. That's what we're here for. So please just give us a call. Anyone in the office can help assist you with that. I hope that you enjoyed this session, and I really thank you all for the opportunity to provide this information today. Again, thank you for the opportunity. It's really been a pleasure. And if anyone has any questions or concerns, please don't hesitate to reach out.
Thank you. Any questions? We're good?
Just a quick one to make it even complicated. I received a I have actually tried of economic interest. Oh my goodness, 1984. I received a notice to set up a file to statement of economic interest, and then I received I was required. And the only reason I can think I might not be required is my effective date of appointment.
I do apologize. That was very broken up, so I wasn't able to hear the question. But I would just encourage you to give us a call at the office. We're happy to look at your account and see what's going on. It sounds like that you're getting conflicting information, and I apologize for that.
I'm leaving the country tomorrow, so.
Oh, you're leaving the country tomorrow.
I checked with Kathy in your office. So helpful, and she said anyone in this calendar year who is a commissioner for 2022 has to complete it. Is that correct?
That is correct. Anyone seated as of today or as of tomorrow will need to complete the statement of economic interest for 2022, and it's with information from 2021. But yes, anyone seated as of tomorrow.
That's directly that's directly opposite from the notice I received from the Oregon Government Ethics Commission.
I'm struggling to hear everything, and I do apologize.
I would say that that's actually directly different than the notice I received from the Government Ethics Commission that said not to file one.
So I am happy to you're welcome to reach out to me, and I'm happy to help you with this evening. I would have to look into your account and see what's happening. But Karen Lynn has my contact information, and she can provide you with my cell phone number, my email, and my desk number.
Thank you. Anything else? Great. I think we have one last item on our agenda. Thank you for your presentation. It was informative. Let's go on and finish up with one last item on the budget development process.
Yeah, we may need to take a beat while we're waiting for Ramona and Tom. I don't know if they're listening in or potentially joining from their offices remotely.
After all this time.
Yeah, after all this time.
Let me go find them.
You want to just give us a 5 minute?
Let's take 5 minutes.
All right, 5 minutes, everybody. Okay.
Are we ready to reconvene?
I think we're about ready. Let's maybe give Karen Lynn another moment. Commissioners who are on the Microsoft Teams, if you're in a position to put yourself back on camera so that we know that you're ready, we'll reconvene the meeting in a moment. There's Lee. There's the card. There's Ramona.
Sorry, Jen.
That's okay.
I was
No.
behind you.
No, that's good. It's good. I like running the camera.
Thank you.
My other career here.
Yeah, you are the IT guy.
That's one way
I
to
think
stay in
we'll
the
just
office all day, is
wait
schedule
for,
your presentation in the morning. You have to do it.
Yeah, right.
Oh, I would have been here anyway. We're good.
All right, Chair Cross, when you're ready. I think.
All right, let's go forward with our last agenda item today, and that's the development of the budget process. And take it away.
For the record, my name is Tom Riddle. I'm the Director of Operations here at HECC. First, I'd like to thank Chair Krause and Vice Chair Rowe and all the commissioners for the experience today. It was my first commission meeting, and it was educational and enjoyable as well. So thank you. Today I'm going to talk about the budget process. I'm going to give you a brief overview of the statewide process, be quick, and then we'll go back into where we are today and what are our next steps. The statewide budget process has 3 distinct phases. The first is the agency requested budget. That's what we're developing now. It's due to the governor's office on this September 1st. And this time around, Commissioner Devlin pointed out yesterday, it's pretty unique. It has been 16 years since we know we were going to have a change in governor. So Governor Brown will get it for the first month or 2, and then the incoming governor will get it. And that final product, late January, early February, will go to the legislature. And they'll finalize the legislature, the adopted budget. Hopefully it's June 30th. So that's the schedule. We're in that first part. We have until September 1st to finalize our. You will see a hopefully final product in August. We'll come to that meeting for approval of our agency requested budget. And so right now we're in April. May we'll have a little bit more refined list, and in June we'll have for 85% of it done, ready to go. That's our schedule. That's our next steps. And today we're at the very beginning of the ARB, and one part of that is ideas. We're not going to be talking about our base budget, which are continuing programs, continuing funding, but new items. And the new items are brought to us as either legislative concepts, which are changes in law, or their proposed policy option packages, which are new budget items. And sometimes these go hand in hand. For example, the Oregon Tribal Grant Program that we discussed today, that you approved the rules today, we're going to be bringing that one forward as a change in law to memorialize that, so we have that for the next biennium. And then we're also going to be asking for funding. So we will have a concept and a package in our agency request budget for that. Sometimes if we're just expanding an existing program that we already have authority for and we're asking for new funding, we will just put in a policy option package asking for more funding. And sometimes if we're making a technical fix or we want to change our authority but there's no fiscal impact, we will just put in a legislative concept. So the budget process just started. We have gathered these ideas together, and it's from a brainstorming sessions from several different people, different stakeholders. So it is just a list that we have put in somewhat of an order, but we have not ranked them, vetted them, or prioritized them. But we want to share them with you today. After that, we're going to go into an outreach program. The governor has asked us this biennium to focus on outreach. So we'll be talking to student organizations, business interests, and community-based organizations, especially those that serve or represent BIPOC populations. We're going to get your feedback, we're going to get their feedback, and we're going to be revising this list over the next 2 months. We'll probably drop some items on it. So before I hand it over to Ramona to go over those different concepts and option packages, what I want to make clear is what we're looking for you is, did we miss anything? Are some of them off the mark where they're not going to take us down our intended roadmap, and maybe we shouldn't spend as much time with them on? We don't need to discuss every one in detail, but we want to get an idea what direction, which ones can we drop, maybe, or which ones have we missed. So that's what we're looking for today. Is there any questions before I hand it over?
See anything?
Thank you. My name is Rebecca Longmaker. I'm the deputy for Higher Education Planning Commission. Thank you for letting us talk to you about this today. You are actually one of our sort of premier entities to get some feedback from. And so what I've done is, I've handed out the list of ideas that we've gathered to date. We've been out talking to some of our traditional partners, like Tom said, different universities and community colleges, workforce partners, labor unions, community-based organizations. So most of the things that are included on the list that I handed out to you are ideas that came from the outside. And they're, at this point, this is a point in time list, and we're not endorsing them in any way. What we're saying is, at this point, this is really what our stakeholders have said that they are interested in pursuing. And I would also include in that list of stakeholders also some of the internal HECC staff. Some of the ideas came from this. So this is a compilation of the things that we've heard so far, and it is changing on a daily basis as we go out and talk to people. I am not going to hit every idea on this, and for those of you who are joining us remotely, this is the exact same document that is in the materials that were provided to you, so you can look at it electronically. I just handed it out for ease of process to the people in the room. The first set of ideas here is just something that we know that the Commission has historically had a great deal of interest in learning about and supporting. And we have future conversations scheduled for our funding and achievement group and this group to bring back more fully vetted ideas on financial aid to students. To hit the highlights, we almost always go forward and ask the question about whether or not we need to have any policy enhancements, changes, tweaks to the language to both our largest grant programs, Oregon Opportunity Grant and the Oregon Promise. Now, depending on your point of view, the request to change that could be anything from minor changes to wholesale restructuring of those programs. So that is definitely one idea that always comes up. The other one you've heard a lot about already today is the Oregon Tribal Students Grant. And I'm not going to go into that in any more detail, but we do need to create that in statute in order to make it a permanent program versus a one-time funding opportunity. Also, one of the things that is on our list to pursue, and I'm going down to item number 6 at this point, is just wanting to expand our FAFSA-ORSA completion initiative. And that is because of the pandemic. We had a lot of students who have kind of dropped out of the process, and we need to re-engage them so that they can find out what kind of aid that they are eligible for. And lastly, on this page is an idea for a new program, which would be an Oregon Work Study program. And the details of that are not fully worked out. None of the details of these are. It's just a proposal for a program that some of our stakeholders would like to see us pursue. The next page really represents the ideas that came primarily from public universities and community colleges themselves. And they include everything from packages from both the community colleges and the public universities indicating that they've got some technology needs that they'd like to see addressed. And so you see on 16 and 17, public universities are asking for IT modernization and community colleges are asking for a cybersecurity package. A lot of these are still placeholders. We're working with them specifically to figure out what it is that would be included in these asks should they go forward. The three that are the big ones that you're going to continue to hear from us about, and particularly from Jim, are our community college and public university support funds. And that is a very intense process where we are working with all of the institutions to figure out what their costs currently are, what their goals are for programs, and where the ask comes in for both community colleges and public universities. The other one that is an ongoing sort of elongated process is our discussion with the institutions about capital projects and which ones that they would like to see supported. And so we have a prioritization process that where we compare those projects to the list of goals for capital projects for the state, and we bring you at a point in the near future a list of recommendations about which projects we're recommending pursuing bond funding for. The last two on the list, again, came from the universities, or both public university. One of them is an equity proposal, really asking for $100 million to half of it to support first generation and other traditionally underrepresented students, and half of it going toward the Oregon Opportunity Grant. That one would obviously dovetail with the Oregon Opportunity Grant, one that I talked about a few minutes ago. The last one in this part of the list is the Strong Start program. While we have resources dedicated for this purpose right now, they are one-time resources, and so we're looking for some continuation of funding to continue this program to really create those bridge programs that provide wraparound services and academic skill building for incoming and return students. Next, you'll see the HECC operations list. This one is not too fascinating. Basically, all of these new programs, we have some capacity building to do. That's what most of these packages are. There are 3 packages on this list, however, that really, I think, contribute to continuing to get better at the outreach components of the work that we do. And they are 24, 25, and 26. The number 24 is we're looking to enhance our website accessibility and looking to make an investment there so that students and members of the public with disabilities can access information about our services in an easier manner. And the next one is really looking to create some DEI positions to do some increased outreach and culturally responsive service to labor unions, tribes, and priority populations, particularly for our workforce programs. We are getting better at making those connections in the education realm, but workforce is looking to build its capacity to do the same type of work. And lastly, 26, one of the things under consideration is just creating a staff position to coordinate rural student policy and see if there are in fact different needs or services that would be more appropriate for rural students. We have in the data and technology section, I'm not going to dwell on this, we have a continuation of our FAMIS project, our financial aid management information. We had an investment this biennium of $5 million in Q-bond funds. We're looking to finish that project, and so it'll be a similar investment and ask for next biennium. We also are continuing to pursue the transfer portal that I know we have talked about in this group before, but the technology that allows us to really facilitate the transfer of credits between community colleges and public universities. And under the AmeriCorps volunteerism, mostly these are recruitment tools to help us recruit and retain volunteers who work for the state through the AmeriCorps program. And one of the proposals is some housing assistance to create and identify affordable housing options in rural and urban Oregon. And the other is a matching education incentive to match the federal aid that's available to those individuals. And lastly, you've heard a lot about our Future Ready Oregon programs. The the next several packages that are on this list are kind of enhancements or next steps for that career-based work. You'll see everything from expanding the Credentials That Work program and making it available statewide, to buying equipment for career technical education, and really developing a curriculum for essential employability skills. These are kind of next steps for our workforce initiatives. And with that, I just want to stop talking and really hear from you about what would you propose to us that we focus on. And by focus, I mean, are there things that are priority packages for you, and how would you want us to pursue vetting those and getting input both from other groups and from this group? And also, are there things on the list that you would suggest should come off the list or be modified in some way? And that could either be that we need to expand them or focus them more. And lastly, is there anything missing? Which we know, even though this is a long and extensive list, there are always new ideas and things missing.
Commissioner Edwards has a question.
Yeah, thanks for that. I see that there's good, there's a line item there for FTEs for data warehousing and getting the data structures set up. But I'm curious about, we've had conversations over the last year and a half or so about the need to improve some of our predictive analytics and start to do some better forecasting and you know, kind of return on investment type analysis. Where's that included in the forecasting? I'm not sure if Amy's around to speak to that, or whether it can be something that's done offline.
There is a data warehouse project that is included in the data technology one, and that is really looking at creating some integrated data policy and looking at bringing together the data from educational institutions and training programs. And so I think part of it may be included in that, but it also may not be fully represented here. And so we would absolutely welcome knowing what specifically you'd like us to include in that, because we can certainly grow that package or idea.
Yeah, well, that's kind of the baseline, you know, getting the right data at the right time, making sure it's consistent. I know there's a lot of manual work that goes on. So this is sort of automating the basic data collection. But there's the layer that says, well, what do you do with that? There's not much point having data if you're not doing the analysis off the top of it. And so there's the question is really, where are we taking into account being able to use that data more in a more forward-thinking, predictive way to help us to support some of the decisions that have come across our table in the last year and a half around, you know, where the priorities are for funds to go. You know, where's the best sort of really return on investment. And those discussions have been sort of ongoing. I'm trying to think of a specific example, but I know we had a lot in December 2019, I think, around this exact, like helping the commission staff be able to provide more predictive analytics, more forecasting, more what-if scenarios to help us make better data-driven decisions.